Okay, welcome back for another part of our walkthrough of Oxygen Not Included's base game. We'll pick up right where we left off, where we were talking about getting an early game cooling setup, and just after we set up our water systems. One thing I forgot to mention, by the way, is eventually these tanks will get full. Add an extra liquid vent on the very end of it, so that if all these tanks are full, we will still vent the water into this area. You can also set up a bottle emptier so that if you find any water that's out on the map, they can bring it here and throw it into the pool. So you also don't want to overfill this, so just in case, you probably want to put a hydro sensor on this to make sure that you're not spilling water out into places you don't mean to. But usually it will not be that big of a deal. Once we find a renewable water source, we will basically put that on automation to only ask for water from that source if we need it. We'll cover that as soon as we find it, but we have to find it first. Alright, anyway, let's talk about cooling for this stage of the game. Now that we've cleared this area out of water, let me hook up this other one really fast. I want this to go into my whole water system, so I'm just going to put it in the drainage of all the sinks in the bathrooms and stuff. That should send it all the way down into where it needs to go, so that should work. But let's talk about cooling. Cooling is going to also be done with water, and this is going to be a very remedial setup for the time being. And you want to kind of put it out of the way, but also somewhat near where you need to cool things. So the only thing I can think about cooling right now is basically my food or my power area, which this will all change in just a little bit, but let's just set up something really basic. I'm just going to have an area that I carve out that looks something like this, built with igneous rock, insulated tiles. Going to build some ladders down into there, and this is just going to be a place for water to sit. I will put a liquid pump here up at the top of it so that if I get too much water, it'll get pumped out and into my system. It's also low-key, kind of a tricky way to generate a little bit of extra water throughout the game if you're having a hard time finding a renewable source. So that can also help, but I'm going to set this up for drainage. And all this is going to be is just a pool of water that gets cooled by my duplicants running ice in here periodically. But we also want to have some tanks in here that are going to be used to send over to other things. I actually need to scoot this up just a little bit, so let's get this out of the way first. I'm also not super happy with how wide this is. Hold on, let me widen this just a little bit, because we might need more than 1 or 2 tanks worth of cooling. There we go. Let's do 2 between each one. So basically all this is going to be is a pool of water that your duplicants occasionally will run ice to. And that ice will basically be cooling the water off in here. The ice will also melt, and that's what'll give you a little bit of extra water. But the ice melting and exchanging temperature with the water that's already in there will be a way to provide a very basic pool of cold water. That pool of cold water can then be used to cool down the water that's sitting inside these tanks, which you can then run out to other areas. So if I want to run some pipes over here that are filled with some cold water, it'll run back and forth between this tank and cool off that area. For cooling, you can just use sedimentary rock pipes. Those are one of the better ones that are cheap for this phase of the game. Eventually we will want to use some radiant pipes to cool all this stuff off. And by the way, I don't have to do this here right now. My blossoms and everything are fine in my game. But in your game, this could be totally different. You could be in a position where you had to build your food in an otherwise hot area, or maybe you ran out of cold water and you have to use some warmer water or something like that. So this is not necessary for my run right now. I would not do this if I wasn't making a video, but this is the same cooling solution that I would use to help this area out. These 2 lines are basically just going to be a quick loop that's going to send water in and out. And then down here is going to be my pool of water, so I want to request some ice and maybe snow, something that's just going to melt into regular water in these, and I want to also set this to not take a ton. So maybe like 1,500 kilograms per each bin. And each bin is going to be, this is not very uniform, but I don't really care. You could add another one over here if you wanted to. But each bin is just going to spread out the amount of ice that's going to go in here because it melts faster and it exchanges the temperature faster if it's in smaller quantities but spread out over a larger area. It's kind of like the idea of like radiating heat or cooling in this case. Your pipes for exchanging the water back and forth between that system, I'm just going to kind of loop them around a little bit at the bottom. It doesn't matter whether it's going in or out of the tank, either one. I just want it to take any warmer water that's been from up here because it's warming up this area and exchange the temperature with the cold water that's sitting down in these tanks. The trips in between, though, I don't want to waste all of my cooling potential, so I do want to put igneous rock insulated pipes between the areas that I don't necessarily want to be cooled. Like, I don't necessarily care if this area is warmer. This is the area that I exclusively need to be cooled. By the way, I'm also going to mention, before I get comments about this, this is a very remedial cooling option. There are more fancy ways to cool things, and there are also later game options to cool things that we just don't have access to quite yet, and newer players might not have access to by this point in the game anyway. So that's why we're using this solution. This is just meant to be an easy temporary option. I'll cover the more intricate cooling solutions later, but we'll need access to things like plastic and steel, a lot more power generation. This is just a super dirt cheap way to cool something. So now that we have these things requesting ice, I'm not going to specifically mine this area out, but rather we're just going to subsist on the ice that we happened to accidentally mine out when we were getting access to our sleet wheat. If you need more ice, you can come in here and kind of pick at it a little bit, just to grab some of this out of here. You don't need a tremendous amount, and you shouldn't have gigantic cooling needs by this point in the game. If you do, then we're probably not doing something that we should be doing in the early game, and we're asking too much of our power or our other systems by this point. So that's not a great way to be anyway. Finally, we need to also make sure to hook our water back up to everything that's going to be needing it, because our food's going to start running out of water here in a sec. So I'm just going to do... I guess I can just disconnect that. Get rid of this. We don't need that pump anymore. And yeah, just going to get the rest of this all set up here really quickly. Set up some power for this pump, just in case we need it. I'm going to also switch, like we talked about. This will produce polluted dirt. I'm going to switch all my polluted dirt housing to just this one area, because this is the only thing that's going to be actively producing polluted dirt anymore. And then the places that I did have it collected, which were... where are they? I thought they were over here somewhere. I don't know where they are, but basically whenever slime got mined, I had it... oh, here it is. I was having it run to this area, so I'm going to stop collecting polluted dirt here so that all my duplicants will move it over to this new area. My duplicants won't try to run polluted dirt to places that it doesn't need to go. Okay, I think we could probably call this setup good for now. Let me do this. I will edit a second part onto this video, which is not something I will typically do, but because this is taking a little while to come up, I will wait for my duplicants to get this up. I'm going to fill this up with water also. So I'm just going to run something like this and run a pipe over here. Whoops. Just play the xylophone a little bit. I'm going to run a pipe over here to send water into this area so that it can start getting filled up, and we will have something to have the ice exchange temperature with it. I'll also need water to fill up these tanks, but these tanks I'm going to fill up with polluted water. Let me cut for just a minute. I'll come right back when it's time to fill those up, and then we'll get this thing cooling. Okay, here we go. Fast forwarded a little bit so we could catch up to the next stage of this, which is going to be filling our tanks up with polluted water. So we've had this polluted water set up over here for quite a while, which is basically just draining more and more polluted water into it that's been naturally occurring on the map. Polluted water is a pretty good like medium to exchange temperatures because it's pretty dense and it has a decent temperature range. It's also really plentiful. So what I'm going to do with all these tanks is I'm going to hook them up in a three-way split. Something kind of like this. Just going to be a little bit awkward since I need to get this side over there. but a three-way split at one point so they all get filled equally, and then connect that line up to the main line. Just going to go into these tanks, and you can fill these tanks up as much as you want. I would say maybe halfway is fine. You don't really need to fill them up all the way, because once they're inside here, they don't really exchange temperature with the surrounding things very well. It's almost like they're like insulated once they're inside this reservoir. It's weird. Seems really counterintuitive, but it definitely does not exchange as much as I feel like it should be. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. So once we get these all filled up, I'm also running water in, which, by the way, we reconnected all of our water systems. So our water systems is now fully up and operational. This is all the water we have to speak up right now until we get the rest of this all hooked up, which I need more ladders because duplicates can't reach this. But yeah, so all of our water systems are basically running... Huh? I don't understand. Oh, I just don't have water flowing up in here yet. I need to fix this. Here we go. Alright, so all of our water systems are just connected up to one central point, like I've been trying to say and failing the last few times. Once we get all our cooling set up, we should be good to go, but you definitely don't want to like hook it up all the way until your tanks are filled up to a reasonable level. You can already see the water flowing up here, which is going to be a little bit hotter than we want it to for right now, but it will start to clear everything up once we get this ice starting to melt and integrate with this other temperature of water. So this is the basic idea. Once everything is filled up and ready to go, you can disconnect this. You probably want to not disconnect it at a place that's like gonna spill into here. So you could like turn your pump off if you wanted to. Another great reason to have these signal switches so that if you turn the pump off that is sourcing all of the water, then you can disconnect it afterwards once the pipes are empty so you don't make a mess. But yeah, that's the basic idea. Once these are all the way filled up, I'll reconnect these lines, I'll disconnect the other ones, and this will just continually cycle back and forth with water that is cooler than it normally would be in there. So yeah, that's the idea. We'll have a fully running cooling setup, and we're going to need our cooling setup to grow a little bit for the next video, because the next video we're going to be setting up our next form of power, which is going to be natural gas, which is going to be up here. This is going to happen pretty quick. I've got a couple of little maintenance things to do around the base, so I'll do those first. We'll get this all fully running, and then we'll start the natural gas and power section of the walkthrough. So I'll see you there in just a bit. Thanks for watching.